Hi, I'm Karen Morgan. I'm a volunteer with AARP Maryland, and I'm here to bring you another in a series of conversations about elder abuse and financial fraud. It's brought to you by AARP Maryland on behalf of Protect Week. And Protect Week is also brought to you by a consortium of social advocacy, law enforcement, financial regulation, and government agencies that all band together to shine a spotlight on elder abuse and financial fraud. Protect Week is from June 14th to June 18th this year, and it always coincides with World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, which is observed on June 15th. And with that, I would like to introduce you to our guest today, who is Donnette Ellis. She has a bunch of initials after her name, LCSW-C. But she is a licensed clinical social worker who has been with adult services in Baltimore County for 11 years. She is one of two supervisors in the intake unit where she oversees a staff of 7 other social workers. So welcome so much, Donette. Oh, we really appreciate having you here.
Good morning to you, and thank you so very much for having me.
Well, Donette, let me first start out with the obvious question for those of us who don't know. I mean, people have heard about child protective services and things like that, but what about adult protective services? What is that?
Well, you're right. People may often overlook the fact that there are adults who are in need of services and more specifically need of protection, whether it be even from their own selves or family, neighbors, or even other professionals. Um, when we speak of adults, we're talking about any person 18 years or older. And the purpose of adult protective services is to protect the health, the safety, and the welfare of any vulnerable or endangered adult.
Well, it's really important to get your perspective, I think, because you and the social workers that you supervise are sort of on the front lines. You can come face to face with the victims of abuse and their perpetrators if they're members of the family or other caretakers. So, can you talk to us about that? What happens in that situation?
Well, to be honest with you, more often than not, when there is any evidence of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, in many circumstances, it may not be malicious. It may be people who are trying to support their loved one and lack the information and or resources to properly support that person in their current environment. Um, but when we do see it, it requires we come in and we give them the information and try to implement supports if it's appropriate. If not, we may have to involve the police, the fire department, code enforcement, Office of Economic Crimes, those type of other agencies, or what do you call it, ears, to come in and help us to appropriate their services for this particular client.
Okay. So if you're called into a home to provide services, what are some indications that abuse is occurring in that home?
Well, abuse with the elderly may be physical, it may be sexual. So we're looking at bruises, unexplained cuts, sprains, welts. In terms of financial exploitation, we're looking at someone misusing that adult's funds or property, where bills aren't being paid, forged signatures on checks. If in the event of neglect, we're looking at absence of appropriate medical care, clothing, inadequate food, maybe no shelter, inappropriate shelter, lack of supervision if that person has some type of cognitive deficit. You'll see poor hygiene, lack of food or water. The client is dirty, unkempt. The home is unkempt. And in the event, and we talk about abuse and neglect, sometimes it's self inflicted where the adult cannot adequately meet his or her own needs. And again, you'll see poor hygiene, unsafe living environment, and inactivity or wandering.
Do you find that financial exploitation often goes hand in hand with other types of abuse? This is a question from our chat, by the way, but do you see that?
Not necessarily, not
Oh,
necessarily.
that's
But
interesting.
it does happen, but not necessarily.
So, and we have another question from our chat too. You mentioned the Office of Economic Crime. What is that?
That's the police department that will go in, and there's a lot of fraud with people calling, not necessarily overseas. It could be actually in another state,
Mm-hmm.
who are contacting a lot of seniors and ask, either I need help, or your grandson is in another state and been arrested, or um, oh, my children, I have a medical emergency, and then it
Right.
sometimes evolves into threats.
Right. And then you definitely want the police involved when it comes to
Correct.
that.
Right.
So, in those instances where you do run across someone who's committing elder financial abuse in the household of a victim, is there a typical profile for these people who are committing this type of abuse?
No, you see it among all economic groups, all races, all classes. Yeah.
And that's interesting that it sort of permeates all that, that there's not like a specific type of person. I wonder why that is. I mean, if you're wealthy and there's somebody in your household who's committing financial abuse, why would that be?
I didn't hear the latter part of your.
Oh, I said it, and I mean, what if a person has resources, they have financial resources, but there's still a person in the household who's committing financial abuse? It's interesting that it doesn't matter what economic class, or I wonder why that is.
Opportunity.
And
Opportunity.
what do you mean by that?
The opportunity exists that I can commit this act and more likely not get discovered. Or there's no one, there's a sense of isolation where there's no one to come in and check to see whether or not things are being done the way they appear to be getting done. So it's just opportunist crime of opportunity.
And people do, it seems that anyway, that people can become more isolated as they get older.
Right.
So their circle that knows what's going on becomes smaller and smaller.
Exactly. And those are the things you want to look out for: people who are active, who are becoming increasingly isolated and or being monitored when they're on phone calls, or being instructed, coached what to say when someone calls.
And that can definitely happen in a financial abuse situation with
Hmm.
somebody on the phone.
Correct.
So, say that you go into a household and you do find evidence of abuse, or someone makes a report. What happens after a report is made to Adult Protective Services?
If it's deemed to be an emergency, we have 10 days in which we have to begin and complete that investigation. Other than that, we have 5 days to uh, initiate contact with the said client, and we have a period of 60 days or longer, depending on what is discovered, to complete the investigation and either close the case, continue the case, or refer to other sources.
Okay, and across our there's a banner here for Baltimore County Adult Protective Services, and the phone number for those of you who live in Baltimore County, if you need to contact Baltimore Adult Protective Services. So now you mentioned other agencies. How does Adult Protective Services coordinate with other agencies to protect adults in need?
Well, sometimes we have to enlist the support from the police officers, for the safety and well-being either of the client and or the staff, or we have to engage code enforcement. Let's say it's an unsafe living environment, a fire hazard. We contact code enforcement and the fire department, or sometimes we have to use emergency assistance if the person needs immediate medical attention.
And what constitutes a dangerous environment for your workers? What are you on
Well,
the lookout for?
well, things that we take into consideration is the client's ability to make informed decisions, because people do have the right to make choices and live in situations that may not be acceptable for me or you.
Right.
However, if to me, if they one of the key points though is if they lack capacity to make informed decisions, and let's say they have other health issues going on, and they, they're starting fires, or two, they're wandering, or they're forgetting to eat, not knowing how to take their medications. Um, those are reasons why we may seek support, for example, medical services.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So here's another question from our chat. What does your agency take any specific steps to help prevent a client from being exploited again?
Again, it all depends on their capacity, because there are some people who actually want to keep saying that they're winning lottery from overseas, even
Ugh,
though they didn't buy a ticket. And
yeah.
we, even so, we will bring them evidence. We will provide information. If they authorize us, we'll reach out to family and say, okay, this is what's going on with your mom, your dad, your uncle, that they're being exploited, but they're not hearing us. Um, I forgot the other part of the question, but if we find out that they are being exploited, we can get in touch with the bank. We get in touch with law enforcement, Office of Economic Crimes, and see if maybe we can assist the person in making the necessary changes on their accounts, moving their accounts, changing numbers, if necessary, changing banks to protect their resources.
And maybe sometimes it involves getting the power of attorney over a person, like having a family member get power of attorney for
That is
that
sometimes
person.
necessary, as well as sometimes, again, if the capacity is there to make that decision, or if necessary, we may need to pursue guardianship.
And we have another question from our chat. Are clients forthcoming about abuse from family members, or are they sort of shrouded in shame about it?
Necessarily, um, some people are so ashamed that they have been taken in a scam that they will not admit it. So it can be very difficult at times. They're not necessarily forthcoming. But usually when they say something, is usually when they have been taken for everything.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I know AARP is trying to change the conversation around financial abuse victimization, because AARP clearly wants to shine the shame where it belongs, on the criminals who are doing
Exactly.
it. It's not the person's fault that they've been victimized. These
Right.
criminals spend 24 hours a day trying to figure out how to separate people from their money. But the criminals
Exactly.
are the ones who deserve to be shamed and are
Yes.
shameful.
Yes.
So,
Yes, I
yeah.
would agree. Y-
Well, thank you so much, Donette. We're just about out of time. And thank you so much for your service, because you and the people that you work with come face to face with evidence of elder financial abuse and elder abuse generally. As part of your life's work. It's an incredible service that you provide. The other thing that I want to point out is that Maryland Access Point is showing on our screen right now, and that is a number that Marylanders all over the state can dial to inquire about adult protective services in case they don't live in Baltimore County. So thank you once again, Donnette, for your contributions to the state of Maryland and to helping us out with Protect Week. And you can find out more information about Protect Week activities, teletown halls, webinars, and all kinds of resources to help you with financial abuse and protection from fraud at www.protectweek.org. Thank you, Donnette.
Thank you.